Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Oneohtrix Point Never album, R+7. Oneohtrix Point Never is the pseudonym of electronic music composer Daniel Lopatin, whose productions usually sit on the experimental side of things, embracing elements of ambient music, of progressive synth music, of drone, of a little bit of noise. A lot of the time, the music he makes kind of sits somewhere between being somewhat epic and grand, and also very spacey or numbing. He's also collaborated with quite a few artists and put out some side projects as well, one of which is kind of credited with starting this whole vaporwave thing. The project that I failed to mention in my review of Oneohtrix Point Never's last full-length LP, Replica. But now that Replica has been mentioned, I have to say that that is my favorite album to come out of this project thus far. Mostly because I think that record takes such a strange, unique, and obtuse approach to producing sample-based music. It's just like listening to these very somewhat ambient, but odd and weirdly shaped PLUNDERPHONICS compositions. I'm finding R+7 to be a continuation of this trend in Daniel's music to produce stuff that is a bit more engaging, is more eventful, is more detailed. However, stylistically, I find him drifting away from the samples upon samples upon samples that made Replica such a sonic treasure trove. I have no clue what happened to my mouth right there. Instead of relying heavily on samples, Daniel kind of rests on his laurels and goes back to using synthesizers really heavily, which sound like they're produced via MIDI sequencing. Kind of a calling card for Daniel at this point. I guess what I'm trying to say is that Daniel's music feels like it's entirely generated inside of some computer program to the point where it just does not feel human anymore. However, still R+7 is kind of change for Daniel, because I do think he puts in a lot more effort into finding some synth textures on this record that, yes, while they do feel like they are composed in this very rigid way, sonically, it's very lush. Plus, I would say that Daniel's songs are pretty structured on this album as well. Not meandering so much, not really kind of spacing out so much. Even when he seems to build up to a moment, he kind of takes it away really quickly and goes down a completely different road. Compositionally, I feel like Daniel jumps all over the place, but sonically, a lot of what he pulls together is very pretty. It's very heavenly. Actually, when it comes to synth textures on this record anyway, I would say that Daniel's #1 influence is like cheesy, kitschy, new age music from the 80s and 90s. But he does it with a slightly experimental angle, with kind of a progressive angle, to the point where maybe we're listening to like post-new age here. Take the obviously synth-generated chorus vocals, what sounds like a children's chorus, on the track Chrome County, which has these very relaxing, sweet instrumental swells. But then as the song progresses, Daniel grabs these synth-generated chorus vocals and stretches them out, samples them, and just slows them down to the point where you're getting these digital, noisy, just hissy stretch marks. Daniel's music can be kind of seductive, but it can also be very otherworldly and kind of like you're in the midst of this odd, weird cuckoo land where nothing makes sense. Like how he finishes this track up with this really epic, grand organ solo that sounds amazing, really moving, but then as soon as it comes up, it's like he just kind of fades the track out and cuts it down and just lets the album close. Which is sort of how the first track on here ends as well, which is another track that I like. We have the song Americans on here, which I feel like borrows from this cheesy sense of relaxation by incorporating these just very commercial sounding synthesizers that are also simultaneously dated and like these jungle sounds. There are these fake synth horns all over the track too, but then sort of thrown into this mix that I would normally cringe at are these very tightly composed, like progressive synthesizer arpeggios that make the track feel really primal. It's an interesting juxtaposition of ideas, but then around the 1 minute and 30-second mark of this track, this music just starts to melt away into these somewhat jittery sounds that are kind of unpredictable and popping up and snapping at me really quickly. The track eventually turns to its original sound and then kind of cuts things off And I don't know, I feel like I'm left wanting more at the end of this song, and a lot of other songs here too. But then again, a lot of what Daniel is doing on this album, and maybe this is kind of an issue I had with Replica as well, a lot of what's here is so unorthodox, who's really to say how long or how short it should be? All I know is that there are some tracks on here that I feel are maybe just completely uninteresting because of how short they are. Songs like He, She, or Cryo, which to me don't even ever really get started into something that I would want to return to. They don't even really fade into the following tracks all that well, so it's hard for me to sort of see what they do for this album. I find tracks on here like Zebra, the 6-minute highlight off of this record, so much more interesting with its really jittery synthetic opening, with all these skipping tones just really quickly skipping. All I know is that tracks like this seem to me like this really odd little gadget or toy that I don't know what its purpose is, but I could just stare at it and just kind of like move it, click it this way, and then this weird thing pops out, and it's just puzzling. And maybe this entire album itself could be sort of perceived in that light too. But I guess that doesn't stop me from thinking that some of this album's tracks or functions are less exciting than others. I'm a little all over the place with this album in terms of what songs I like, what songs I don't, and I seem to dislike some, like others, for completely different reasons because of how different these songs feel in tone, in vibe, in sound. And I like that Daniel has come together with a record that so many of the songs here come from totally different worlds, and yet they all feel like they're a part of R+7. Nothing on this album sticks out to me as like, whoa, this doesn't belong here, or this just doesn't stick with the whole theme, or this doesn't really... I guess I just don't find the tracks, the content within the theme and the aura and the world that he creates on this record to be entertaining from beginning to end. Much of the time they are, which is why I guess I'm feeling a light to decent 6 on this thing. Transition. But if you've given this Oneohtrix Point Never record a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Anthony Fantano, R+7, The Needle Drop, forever.